I'm Jay Woodward. As the United States grapples with its ugly incarceration systems, a lot of emphasis has been placed on reforming prisons or improving the lives of people during and after their release. But less attention has been paid to the children of the incarcerated and what's working to support them. So here with me today to talk about one Chicago program doing just that is Maudlyne Ihejirika.
Yes.
Maudlyne Ihejirika. Welcome, Maudlyne.
Thank you, Jay. It's a pleasure to be here.
So your story starts out with the supposition, and it says, with resources, education, jobs, mentoring, or trauma counseling, youth can transcend any dysfunction. So that seems to be at the core of a lot of your writing, and a lot of the things that you look at for Chicago Sun-Times, and in particular this story. Can you tell me, have you found that to be true?
You know, I have absolutely found it to be true. And if I had to identify my life's work, my career mission in my writing, it is that. It is the concept of making people understand that with mentoring, with resources, with opportunities, education, with all those sorts of things that so many of us take for granted, that youth can overcome any obstacles. You know, we so often write them off. We write off youth in the inner city, who have lost their way, or who have dropped out, or who've gotten involved in drugs or gangs. We so often write them off, but what we fail to understand is, what is the backstory? The backstory for so many of these youth is that many of them are growing up in poverty. Many of them never had. And so at some point, did you decide that you could go out and steal what you don't have, what you need? Many of them are being raised in single-parent households where the parent works all the time and they're raising themselves. A child who raises themselves is not going to have the best values. There's so many reasons, including many of these youth are growing up with parents who are incarcerated. So yes, I found that to be absolutely true everywhere I go. When I find the youth who succeed, I find that somebody reached out. When I find the youth who, I should say, succeed against the odds, succeed with that background, those things I just identified, someone gave them a hand, someone extended a hand, someone mentored them and helped direct them and supported them and put the love in that was missing, and put the support in that was missing, and put the exposure to opportunities that was missing, and expanded the horizon beyond their 4 blocks that was missing. That's what I find. It is always because someone did that. And so I believe that to my core, and I always am looking for stories that highlight that so that my readers can, story after story after story, be hit over the head with, maybe there's something that I can do.
So this particular story focuses on the efforts of 2 women who are putting together a program for the children of people who are spending time in prison. And because one of them experienced that herself and knew firsthand what it was like to travel to Joliet every weekend to see her father, and grew up, believing that was a normal condition for every kid, but she could identify what she needed as she reflects back on her experience as a kid. Exactly. What did she find?
What was interesting is that is the background of the 2 women. We're back to, where do solutions come from? Mm-hmm. The background of the 2 women who initiated this. So we have a woman who was the principal of Finger High School, site of one of the most horrific acts of violence that went viral internationally. A teenager who was beaten to death with a 2x4 with nails. Okay, and it just brought infamy and notoriety to the Chicago public school system, both nationally and internationally. And so the principal was a young, early career principal of the school when it occurred. And, after the incident, because it was a black eye for President Obama, this is his hometown, he infused a lot of resources into that school to try to deal with some of the issues that led, to the violence and the gang issues. And so the principal was given a lot of resources to try to make a difference. And within 6 years, she did. She turned that school around. So, but who is this principal? This is a principal who grew up with an incarcerated parent. And her success at that school in those 6 years put her on the map. She became, just one of the most lauded educators, locally and nationwide, and left that school to then try to put some of the things that she had just learned into motion through in a larger framework of working with community organizations to support youth. And so she, despite her having reached the highest pinnacles of her career, she grew up with a father who was incarcerated, who was addicted to drugs. So, I will never forget the comment that one of them made, which is, I would drive to Joliet prison with my mom to see my father every weekend. And I grew up thinking, everybody did. When I heard that, that just struck me to my core. I never heard that said in such a raw and honest way from someone who had reached the pinnacles of their career. And that struck me, because that's why the work that they're doing is so authentic. The other woman...
So that would be Liz Dozier. She's
Yes.
the former principal of Fenger High School. And then I was just going to ask you, this second individual, Nneka?
Yeah, Nneka.
Nneka Jones Tapia. You know what I really love the optics of? A white guy getting all of these names wrong. That is my least favorite part about what's happening right now.
Everyone gets them wrong, so you're not unique.
Oh, God. Well, I guess that's a blessing?
Yes.
I don't know.
Edit it out.
Nneka Jones Tapia?
Yes.
Nneka Jones Tapia, former executive director of the Cook County Department of Corrections.
Right.
What a powerful partnership.
Yes.
What does she bring to the table?
Yes.
I mean, it's obvious to imagine what, but
Yeah.
what did you find?
What was fascinating is here is another woman who has reached the pinnacles of her career. First African-American woman to be appointed executive director of Cook County Jail, one of the nation's largest, if not the largest, county jail system. Mm-hmm. So Cook County Jail is infamous. It has many, many problems, one of which is that we're seeing an influx of mentally ill patients. And into the criminal justice system, and so because you're talking about the local jail, you're getting this population where mental illness is a factor in whatever crime they're in the jail for, predominantly drugs, and some other crimes. And so though that population has risen, exploded, and the jail system has been at great pains trying to deal with it, because what they're realizing is that they're dealing with people who need mental health, treatment. They don't need the jail. They need mental health treatment. So Sheriff Dart, recognizing this, it was at the forefront. People were debating it, and at one point, Sheriff Dart called the Cook County Jail the county's largest mental health provider, and that really brought it home for all of us. And so, as his solution, he hired Nneka as executive director because she was a psychologist and a top lauded, widely recognized psychologist. And so she came in and she did amazing things at the jail. And after 11 years of really putting in place some real supports for mental health, and working with the sheriff's department to advance policies that divert some of these patients for treatment rather than jail, she left to then go back to the field because her first love was psychology. And this is the person who was identified for the program that Liz Dozier's organization had initiated, which is support individuals who are supporting youth. And so this program was proposed by NACA, who said, I bring a unique perspective because guess what? My father was incarcerated. You have two women at the pinnacles of their career who grew up with parents who were incarcerated, and yet they prevailed. But they know why they prevailed. It was because of support. It was because of mentoring. It was because of opportunity. It was because of exposure. It was because of expanded horizons. And it was at its epitome because of education. And that's what they want to give the youth who are walking in their shoes.
So they've got all of the ingredients for success. They know what the things that have to be put into this stew, but what did they find as best practices for the actual program itself? What were they putting into place when they saw kids, and what are some of the concrete examples of what they did with those resources?
Okay, so at its very base, they started with the recognition. When they started to talk with these youth and interview these youth, they found that these youth need to be connected with their parents. So whereas Liz talked of driving to visit her father every weekend with her mother, we're talking about youth who have no one to drive them 3 hours downstate to see their parent. So they grow up without any connection to that parent. And more specifically, okay, it's one thing to grow up without a connection to your father, but your mother is incarcerated and you never see her, you never talk to her, you become alienated from her, you start to feel like an orphan. All of the things that come from that loss of mothering, what they recognized was at its very base, they got to start there. So they worked with organizations who do something so simple as pile a bunch of youth into a van every Saturday from a jumping off point in the inner city. And they come, they're brought by brothers, sisters, aunts, grandparents, and they're dropped off and they hop on a van and they get driven 3 hours and they get to sit with their mother for 2 hours or whatever the time span is and say, I have a mom and she loves me and she cries when I walk in. There is something more. I'm not out here by myself. And that at its very base is where they started. And that's only the beginning. Then there's all the other supports. Let's make sure they have tutoring. Let's make sure that they finish high school. Let's make sure that they're plugged into mentoring programs. Let's make sure they're plugged into after-school programs. How do we support these youth who are missing the very basics of parenting and filled with the worst psychological burdens? How do we support them to make sure they know, despite that, I can succeed. I too can be someone.
And it all starts with something even as simple as just a bus ride.
As a bus ride.
Sometimes that's enough to get the ball rolling.
Yeah.
So what happens, there's a dark side to this. There's a dark side to when it takes a president to step in, identify a problem, and elevate the solution. It's not a sustainable, mappable, not everybody can call Obama and say, your hometown needs you.
Exactly.
How does this spread? How do you apply this solution beyond that?
I think that what we just identified is that it was applied beyond that.
Yeah.
What we just identified is that, yes, once again, government cannot sustain the solution. Not the city, not the president of the United States. There's only so much money you can throw at a problem. And once the money is gone, if you haven't built something sustainable, well, too bad. So what we see here is that the White House threw money at a problem. It was enough money to help to build a framework of a solution. And an individual, which is where it always comes down to, said, hey, yes, it took all these resources, but we were able to build a framework that works. And we saw what works. Why don't I leave here and build a community or build an organization that will help other community organizations to use the framework that we've built to support the youth and make sure that it can continue. So that's what we are seeing. And Liz did that, and as part of doing that, she put out an RFP for proposals for let's address youth of incarcerated children, and the perfect person responded.
That story is called Initiative Seeks to Interrupt Prison Pipeline, Help Kids of Incarcerated Parents. You can find that story over at chicagosuntimes.com at the Solutions Story Tracker at solutionsjournalism.org. Thank you, Maudlyne, for joining us, and thank you for telling us about your reporting.
Oh, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you for highlighting our work at the Chicago Sun-Times.
I hope to see you again soon.
I do too.